April 1986. The skies above Pripyat, Ukraine are restless. Workers at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant go about their routine, unaware that within days, history will be rewritten in fire and radiation. But something else lurks in the shadows of Reactor 4, something beyond human understanding. Witnesses speak of a creature, black as night, towering with monstrous wings and eyes that burned like molten embers. A being that appeared in the days leading up to the worst nuclear disaster in history. Those who saw it were struck by visions of doom, waking in cold sweats from nightmares they couldn't explain. Some claim the creature spoke to them, not in words, but in a deep, paralyzing sense of dread. But this was no mere nightmare. On April 26, 1986, the omen became reality. The reactor erupted in a cataclysmic explosion. What was the Blackbird of Chernobyl? A grim omen of disaster? A figment of mass hysteria? Or something far more sinister, watching from the ruins of a world forever changed? Welcome back to Alex Reid's Strangest Files, where the past is filled with whispers of the unknown. Hi, I'm Alex. Tonight, for our Season 1 finale, we're diving into a legend shrouded in fear and mystery. A creature, a harbinger of doom, an eerie specter that haunted the skies over Chernobyl in the days before disaster struck. This is Shadow in the Sky, the mystery of the Blackbird of Chernobyl. The night of April 26, 1986 began like any other inside the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. Operators monitored their instruments, their eyes flicking across gauges and dials, unaware that history was about to shift in the most violent way imaginable. The air inside the control room was thick with the hum of machinery, the distant rattle of turbines. Outside, the hulking silhouette of Reactor 4 stood silent against the night sky, an iron giant unshaken. It was 1:23 a.m., and the world had no idea that within minutes, this seemingly indestructible structure would become a wound torn into the earth, bleeding fire and radiation. At precisely 1:23 and 4 a.m., the test began. It was a simple safety procedure, intended to determine if the reactor's turbines could generate enough power to sustain the coolant pumps in case of an emergency. The operators, unknowingly walking a tightrope over disaster, shut off the turbine feed valves, initiating the rundown of the coolant pumps. On the surface, everything seemed to proceed as planned. But beneath the reactor's reinforced concrete and steel, an invisible countdown had begun. The RBMK reactor was quickly slipping past the point of no return. 1:23:40 a.m. We are literally 1 second before the moment the final mistake was made. The operators, sensing that something was wrong, pressed the AZ-5 emergency shutdown button, a move that should have saved them all. But fate had already chosen its course, and 2 lives would expire in the next 6 seconds, and many more in the next weeks and months. The control rods, designed to dampen the nuclear reaction, had a fatal flaw. Graphite tips that, upon insertion, momentarily increased reactivity instead of suppressing it. In that instant, a deadly chain reaction ignited. Power levels surged uncontrollably, rising to 30,000 megawatts, 10 times the reactor's intended output. The temperature in the core skyrocketed. Pressure built. The reactor, a beast now raging out of control, could no longer be contained. At 1:23:47 a.m., the first explosion struck. A massive steam blast ripped through the reactor's casing, tearing apart its steel and concrete shell as if it were paper. The force was so great that it lifted the 2,000-ton reactor lid into the air before slamming it back down at an angle. But the destruction had only begun. Superheated steam burst through ruptured fuel channels, carrying radioactive material into the night. Less than 3 seconds later, a second, even more powerful explosion followed. This time, a fiery detonation likely fueled by a lethal mix of hydrogen and oxygen. The reactor was torn open, its burning core exposed to the sky. Outside, the nightmare unfolded in real time. A blinding flash split the night. A towering column of fire and debris shot into the sky, raining molten fuel rods and glowing graphite blocks across the plant's rooftops. Witnesses saw fiery chunks of the reactor's heart tumbling through the air, landing across the complex like falling stars. Then came the light. A strange blue ionized glow, an eerie specter of radiation rising like a beacon from the ruined core, stretching endlessly into the heavens. For the workers staring up in horror, it was hypnotic, breathtaking even. But that light was death itself, an invisible storm of radiation pouring into the air, seeping into their bodies with every breath. Among the first to die was Valery Kodumchuk, an engineer stationed near the reactor. He was standing above the explosion's epicenter when the first blast tore through the structure. His body was never found. A second worker, Vladimir Shashanok, was pulled from the wreckage, his body charred and broken, barely alive. He would not survive the night. But the real death toll had only begun. Those who rushed to help had no idea they were stepping into an unseen inferno, a radioactive storm that would burn through their bodies in days, weeks, or years to come. Firefighters arrived within minutes, their trucks screeching to a halt outside Reactor 4. They saw flames leaping from the roof, black smoke curling into the night, the scent of burning chemicals thick in the air. Their boots crunched over shattered glass and twisted metal, and their radios crackled with frantic voices. They had no protective gear, no idea what they were truly fighting. They climbed to the roof, hosing down the flames, unaware that every breath they took was laced with lethal radiation. Some would collapse within hours, their skin turning red, their bodies breaking down from the inside out. As dawn broke on April 27th, Chernobyl was no longer just a power plant. It was an open wound in the earth, a disaster spilling across time and space. Helicopters thundered overhead, dumping tons of sand, lead, clay, and boron into the exposed core in a desperate bid to smother the radiation. The fires on the plant's rooftops were finally extinguished, but inside Reactor 4, the inferno still raged. The core burned for days, releasing a silent, invisible killer into the wind, a force that would spread across Ukraine, Belarus, Russia, and beyond, reaching places no one ever imagined. The world would soon know the name Chernobyl, a name that would forever be tied to catastrophe, radiation, and the cost of human error. But for those who had seen the Blackbird in the weeks before, there was another question, one that would haunt them long after the fires died and the ruins were entombed in concrete. Had the disaster truly begun that night? Or had it already been set in motion, a fate written in shadows, long before the world even realized? Let's rewind to the moments before the disaster. For weeks, Reactor 4 stood silent. The hum of machinery, the routine checks, the quiet rhythm of daily operations, all of it normal. There were no warnings, no signs of trouble. The workers went about their shifts as they always had, the vast concrete towers looming above them, a testament to human engineering. The official reports noted nothing unusual, no rising temperatures, no pressure anomalies. Up until April 25th, as preparations began for the upcoming routine safety test, Reactor 4 remained stable. And yet, something beyond human understanding, was already stirring in the shadows. It began as whispers, spreading like wildfire among the workers of the nuclear power plant. It was the early days of 1986. A shadowy figure, massive, black, and watching from above, had been seen circling the plant. At first, few paid attention. Large birds were common in the area, so some dismissed it as an oversized owl. But the 5 workers who saw it up close spoke of something unnatural, something that should not exist. The black-winged creature had no discernible head, only a pair of burning red eyes that seemed to pierce through the darkness. More unsettling than its appearance, however, was the feeling it carried. An oppressive, suffocating weight, as if the air itself had thickened with impending doom. As the countdown to disaster ticked on, the encounters became more frequent. One worker, walking home after a long shift, described how the usual night sounds had vanished. No wind, no rustling trees, no distant dogs barking, just an eerie, consuming silence. Then, without warning, 2 smoldering red eyes emerged from the void above him. He ran, his breath coming in ragged gasps, but the thing followed. He could hear it. Large, leathery wings beating against the night sky, keeping pace just out of sight. When he finally reached his building and turned back, expecting to see something descending upon him, there was nothing. Only the distant glow of the plant, standing still and silent in the night. Others soon reported similar encounters. A maintenance worker on a smoke break swore he saw the creature land atop Reactor 4, its dark wings folding inward as it perched like some unholy sentinel. He tried to call out to a nearby colleague, but the words never left his throat. The weight of an unbearable fear crashed down on him, freezing him in place. The figure remained motionless, its fiery eyes staring down as if studying the plant, watching, waiting for something. A blink later, it was gone, as though it had never been there. But the worker knew what he had seen, and he wasn't the only one. Security guards patrolling the plant's perimeter spoke of seeing something shift in the sky, a black smudge against the clouds that never quite seemed to belong. A few claimed that when they shined their flashlights upward, the beams bent and dimmed, swallowed by the darkness around it. One particularly shaken guard described hearing a strange sound, like static from a failing radio, layered with an odd, distant shrieking. He looked up and saw the Blackbird directly overhead. He collapsed where he stood, shaking violently, his skin cold despite the warm night air. When others rushed to help and asked what he had seen, he muttered a single phrase, quiet, broken, something no one could ever truly understand. By this point, multiple workers had reported their encounters to their supervisors, but their complaints were met with skepticism, brushed off as exhaustion, paranoia, or simple misidentification. The higher-ups at the plant had no time for ghost stories. Reactor 4 was operating as expected, with no system failures, no rising temperatures, no pressure anomalies. There was no logical reason for concern. The sightings, they insisted, were nothing more than superstition and nerves. But for those who had seen the Blackbird, the feeling was unshakable. Something was terribly, irreversibly wrong. And this wasn't the first time something unexplainable haunted the shadows of a nuclear site. The pattern stretches back decades, unfolding like a quiet warning encoded in history. September 1952. The icy waters of the North Sea churn beneath a fleet of warships. Operation Mainbrace, NATO's largest military exercise of the time, is underway. The mission? To simulate a coordinated nuclear response to Soviet aggression. But then, the sky changes. Pilots report shimmering disks following their jets, faster than any known aircraft. Sailors spot glowing orbs above the battleships. One craft, described as metallic and silent, hovered above the HMS Illustrious for nearly 15 minutes before vanishing at impossible speed. Radar techs confirm it, but can't explain it. It was like something was watching us, one pilot would later admit in a classified debriefing. December 1980. RAF Bentwaters and RAF Woodbridge, England, home to American nuclear weapons during the Cold War. In the freezing forest between the two bases, strange lights flicker just beyond the trees. U.S. Air Force personnel investigate, expecting a downed aircraft. What they find is not from this world. A glowing, triangular object hovers just beyond the perimeter fence, silent, pulsing with light. Some say it moved like a living thing, vanishing and reappearing with unnatural precision. Airmen touch its surface, lights surge, radiation spikes. One of the men, years later in an interview, whispered, "It knew we had the weapons." But the strangest cases weren't just seen, they were felt. Across multiple U.S. Air Force nuclear facilities, from Malmstrom in Montana to Minot in North Dakota, something began to unfold that no protocol could explain. Deep underground in the control capsules, missile officers reported a sudden change in atmosphere. An invisible weight settled in the air. Consoles hummed, lights glowed as usual. But something else was there. A presence. Oppressive. Suffocating. Like being watched from just beyond the walls. Then, the missiles began shutting down. One by one, the 10 intercontinental ballistic missiles in their care went dark, offline without warning. The systems showed no errors, no breaches. The security codes remained untouched. It was as if the heart of America's nuclear deterrent had simply gone to sleep. Confused and alarmed, the crews scrambled for answers. Systems were rebooted, protocols reviewed, command lines buzzing with tension. Nothing made sense. Everything should have been working. Then a voice crackled through the intercom from the radar room above.
"Command, we've got something."
Everyone froze. The silence that followed was heavier than any alarm. It wasn't a malfunction. It wasn't sabotage. Something was up there. High above the silo complex, a glowing disc-shaped object was silently hovering in the night sky. It moved with impossible precision, without sound, without heat. It stayed for minutes, watching. Then, just as suddenly as it arrived, it vanished. And as it did, the missiles came back online. No trace left behind. No explanation given. Just the silence of the void, and the memory of something that felt wrong. To this day, officials call it unexplained. Which brings us back to Chernobyl. If the Blackbird was just a myth, if it was all just mass hysteria, why was every sighting only concentrated around Reactor 4? The other reactors, the cooling towers, the surrounding buildings, none of them had been linked to the figure. It always returned to the same spot, hovering, circling, watching. The very place that, on April 26th, would become the epicenter of the worst nuclear disaster in history. If the Blackbird was just a delusion, then why did its presence seem to foreshadow an event that had not yet happened? And you know what? there's more. It wasn't the first time a winged shadow had circled overhead before disaster struck. In Point Pleasant, West Virginia, the year was 1966. Locals began whispering about a figure with glowing red eyes and massive wings, the Mothman. It stalked the night skies, perched on rooftops, chased cars down lonely roads. Then, in December, the Silver Bridge collapsed without warning, killing 46 people. And just like that, the Mothman vanished. Half a world away, Japan, 2011. The air was still, uneasy. In the coastal townships near Fukushima, a few spoke of a creature they called kamikiri, a shadowy bird-like spirit said to appear as a herald of catastrophe. Days later, the earth shook. The tsunami hit, and the Fukushima nuclear plant suffered one of the worst meltdowns in modern history. Different names, different continents, same eerie pattern. Massive black wings, piercing red eyes, a feeling of being watched, a silence that screams. What if these aren't separate myths? What if they're all the same thing? A singular, ancient presence, trailing behind the footsteps of devastation, not to stop it, but to witness it, or maybe to mark it. The Blackbird of Chernobyl, the Mothman of Point Pleasant, the kamikiri of Fukushima, a phantom known by many names, but always arriving before it's too late. So, is the Blackbird of Chernobyl real? Some researchers believe that nuclear power plants and military installations act like beacons, drawing in entities that exist far beyond human understanding. They point to patterns, sightings near disaster zones, interference with high-level weapons systems, eerie visitations before catastrophe strikes. To them, these encounters aren't coincidence. They're evidence. Others take a more skeptical view. They argue that extreme stress or even proximity to radiation might trigger hallucinations, that perhaps the brain, under pressure, weaves terrifying images from shadow and fear. But that theory falls apart under even light scrutiny. Because in the case of Chernobyl, there was no radiation leak before the explosion, no anomaly. Reactor 4 was running stable right up until the test. And yet, people saw it. Workers, guards, technicians, people who had no reason to lie and no connection to one another all described the same thing. A headless creature, massive black wings, glowing red eyes cutting through the night like a fire behind smoke. They saw it before there was anything wrong. So tell me, what do you think? What was the Blackbird of Chernobyl? Just an urban legend or a real otherworldly creature? Could these sightings and strange phenomena be the ultimate proof that we are not alone? That extraterrestrial intelligences, perhaps curious, perhaps watchful, are monitoring the edge of our most dangerous technologies? Or could it be something more ancient? Something spiritual? Are these the Watchers, the angels or demons spoken of in the Bible and other ancient texts? Messengers of warning, or perhaps instruments of judgment? Do they come to warn us, or to cause the disasters themselves? Are they here to help, or to witness our destruction? So many questions, so little answer. Drop your thoughts. I want to read them all. But whatever it is, as history has shown us time and time again, by the time those wings appear in the sky, the countdown has already begun. The warnings are there, always present, yet we fail to see them, fail to understand until it's far too late. Not until the fire ignites, not until the silence descends, not until the damage is irreversible. And with that, we close out the 5th episode of Alex Reid's Strangest Files. Thank you all for tuning in. I'm deeply touched by your subscriptions, thoughtful comments, and incredible support throughout this first season. The sense of accomplishment I feel right now is beyond words. As you might imagine, juggling this podcast alongside a full-time job and a vibrant family life is quite the adventure. So, I'll be taking a short break now to reflect, recharge, and carefully plan Season 2. But don't worry, more exciting content is still on the horizon, including a video essay I'm currently working on. In the meantime, feel free to revisit your favorite episodes or binge listen to the complete Season 1. One last thing, this is your chance to help shape the future of Alex Reid's Strangest Files. I'd love to hear your thoughts. What worked this season? What didn't? Do you have any suggestions or improvements you'd like to see? Here's a question I'm excited to ask you. Would you prefer a more mysterious Season 2, discovering each new episode week by week? Or would you rather vote in advance for the 6 stories we'll cover next season? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I can't wait to build Season 2 with you. And hey, remember, sometimes the creepiest stories are the ones that might be closer to the truth than we'd like to believe. Until next time, my fellow strangers, stay curious, stay weird.